here at Fifth Avenue at the Donahue House for some River Edge recollections of baseball in River Edge. And we started before the camera went on, but we're here with Dave Donahue and Jerry Donahue, and we're going to be talking about some recollections, as I said. But as I said before camera, we started talking about apparently Jerry's dad was an old New York Giants fan. And you notice here we have a Yankee cap because we're going to be talking about Yankees who lived in River Edge. But it turns out that the Donahue house were not Yankee fans. So I thank them, number one, for being here with us. And number two, I thank them for letting me deposit the Yankee cap here, at least for the time being. I promise that I won't stay behind. Well, so let me finish up on what we started before the camera started rolling. We were talking about your dad grew up in Queens.
Jackson Heights, Queens. Okay. And he was an avid baseball fan, as much of America was. It's a national pastime, and at that particular time was as strong as it's ever been, I'm sure. But if you lived in New York at that time, there were three prominent baseball franchises: the Yankees, the Giants, the Dodgers. And there wasn't room for more than one team that you favored. You know, with my father, it happened to be the New York Giants, and he was an avid fan. He had a 1927 baseball that was autographed by all the Yankees. And why was it important to him? Because that was a legendary team. Some call it the best baseball team in history. And he had a neighbor who worked for the Yankees in some capacity. And the fellow took a liking to my father when he was a young boy and brought him back this baseball signed by everybody. And but it wasn't, my father just kept it in his top drawer of his dresser. He didn't treat it with the reverence that it should have been treated with, and I'm not criticizing him. If it were a giant ball from 1927, it would have been much better taken care of. But that's how it was in our family. We hated the Dodgers passionately. We hated the Giants. Hated the Yankees and loved the Giants. And that was when they were here in New York, and also when the Giants and Dodgers moved west. You want to add anything to that, Jared?
No. Well, let me ask you a question here. What's your first recollection? You grew up in town here?
Yes.
Okay, so what year is your first recollection, and do you remember the composition of fans here? Were they refugee Giant fans, Dodger fans, or Yankee fans? Because was it before or after the teams moved out to California, the National League teams?
You want to take that on, Joe? Well, let me see. The Dodgers moved in '58, I believe.
Late 50s, I'm not sure.
And the Giants 2 years later.
The same year? I think 50.
No. Horace Stoneham was the owner of the Giants, and was it Walter O'Malley for the Dodgers?
Yeah.
But the Dodgers were first. They moved to Chavez Ravine, which is where they still play. And the Giants followed, I believe it was 2 years later. But the composition of kids in town was clearly, overwhelmingly Yankees.
Yeah.
There were several people who adopted the same attitude that we did, like the Oberdors, for example. They were Dodger fans.
Yeah.
They were, his father grew up in Brooklyn. They hated the Yankees. They hated the Giants, but loved the Dodgers.
Right.
But overwhelmingly, wouldn't you agree, Jared, that it was
absolutely.
Yankees?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jerry, your first recollection of anything related to baseball?
Oh, well, I mean, baseball in general, since I was a kid, I can't remember when, but as soon as a baseball fan my whole life, of course. My best friend was Billy Oberdorf, and he was a staunch Dodgers fan, so we both joined in hating the Yankees together, but we also hated each other's teams as well. But so
So before I get to the Yanks in town, you were talking earlier in terms of playing Little League in River Edge, and at the time, was it at Memorial
Yes.
Park, or was there another field?
No, same field. The only difference was Memorial. Little League baseball in this town, in every town, was huge, huge. I mean, a lot of passion, and back then, they'd have the junior leagues, Robin League, Double A, Triple A, then the major leagues, and the major league games were all played in Memorial Field, and it was a place to go. As a player, as a kid, just to watch, your buddies play. I mean, it was easily the most popular thing in town by far. And Holly M. Davis was the school is no longer there, but Holly M. Davis down just off Valley Road, behind Valley Road, was where the Robin League played, and Holly M. Davis was I believe he was a member of the Riverdale Board of Education. That was a place where we used to play Little League, Robin League games, and also during the summer, all the parks had teams. Cherry Hill had a team, Holly M. Davis had a team, Roosevelt had a team, and Brookside Park had a team.
Really?
And we used to travel, usually by bicycles or walk, to the various places around town, and we'd play, pickup games. No umpires, no nothing. Just it was great. It was great fun, and we loved it.
Jerry, you have anything you want?
No.
All right. Couple of recollections. I don't know if you remember, but you were talking about the Robin League, and I think one of the teams was the Yankees. And I grew up a Yankee fan at the time. My family was from the Bronx, but I was so heartbroken when I wasn't selected for the Yankees. And
Sure.
I was not the only one, but all of us, were jockeying so we could end up on the Yankees there.
Sure.
So, and a couple for the Mets it was at the time.
Yeah.
So, but Orioles, who wanted to be on the Orioles?
Right.
So. The other thing, and I don't know if you remember this, but there was if I remember correctly, there was a promotion that if you hit a home run at Memorial Field, I don't know if you remember the Cherry Hill Luncheonette where Villa Capri ended up being, but it was down by.
I know the place. Certainly.
You could win a free, and I don't want to exaggerate, so I think it was a hamburger or a milkshake or something, because it was hamburgers, French fries, and before McDonald's. That was the place locals went to, but I don't know if you have any recollections
no, I
of
don't
that.
have as a matter of fact, Villa Capri may not have even been there.
No, it was before the place that was there before.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
No, I played for Bogard Funeral Home, and we were called in the major leagues, and we were called Bogard's Angels after the California Angels, and we had a very distinctive cap, which was a black cap. I guess with an A for Angels on the front. I'm just guessing, but the distinctiveness came from there was a halo on top of the cap. I didn't care about the American League. I didn't care about the Angels. But being part of Bogards, we were promised a discount when our demise came. Yeah. I'm only kidding, of course.
That's a cool story. The reason we're here tonight is we heard that there was a story concerning a certain Yankee who was in town. And let me give some of the background. Apparently, in the era before big salaries, given the accessibility to Yankee Stadium, the Yankees used to call this a summer home, used to rent out houses throughout town. And growing up, there was the legend that Mickey Mantle lived in town. I never saw him, but that was the buzz. But you apparently have a Mickey Mantle story in terms of your family.
Jerry certainly does.
Well, yeah, I forget exactly the year. I figure I must have been around 9 years old. I don't know, 1959, something like that, 58. And I used to go down to Manning Avenue, the end of Manning Avenue, close to Elm, and where Mickey Mantle and his family lived. And a few times a week, I'd hook up with Mickey Jr., and we'd just hang out. And he was a few years younger than me. I'm not sure how many. But, so yeah, we just most of the summer, I just go down, knock on the door, and see if he was there, and yeah, he'd come out and we'd play.
You interacted with Mickey Jr., but also with the parents.
No.
You know, did you
No,
ever see Mickey?
I mean no, never saw Mickey there.
How about Merlin, the wife?
I believe she answered the door sometimes, yeah, but never really interacted with her. No.
And I guess you were a kid, so
Yeah.
Mickey Jr. was just another neighborhood kid?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a few years younger, so it wasn't exactly like we had a lot in common.
And he was
But
a Yankee.
yes, yes. So, I mean, it was just kind of a thrill to be connected somehow to even a Yankee, but, to a professional ball player, to his son. And so, yeah, we didn't have a lot in common, but we hung out.
I don't want to forget this. So you were both local in school at the time. I guess you were both kids at the time. Was there any buzz about the fact that your family, even though Giant fans and ultimately Met fans, but that you were hanging out with the Mantles? Did it create any buzz, or was he just part of the neighborhood?
I would say part of the neighborhood. I mean, everybody knew that Mickey Mantle was a celebrity, but the kids didn't act that way. They were just, roughhouse kids like we were. Yeah, it wasn't. Nobody was particularly starstruck, but everybody thought it was, hey, it's cool. Mickey Mantle lived in town, and then, I mean, I'm sure we'll discuss this fairly soon. There were lots of Yankees in town,
Right.
lots of them. And, for about a 3 or 4 year period, I would say, maybe 5. I mean, there were probably close to a dozen Yankees. And they were good back then, and it was fun.
Did you guys ever, or do you know of anybody who ever went down there seeking an autograph? Or
Yeah, Joe, you might.
Well, yeah. I went down with my best friend, Billy Oberdorf, Dodger fan. We went down to Tom Sturdivant's house. I forget his address. He was on the southern end of town. And my recollection is that his 3 kids came to the door. And we gave him our baseballs and asked if their dad could sign them for us. So they take the baseballs, and we're waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, nothing. Finally, again, my recollection is that his wife came out with each of our baseballs. And it was kind of a jackpot. It was Tom Sturdivant's signature, it was Mickey Mantle, it was Yogi Berra, Bill Skowron, Eno's Country Slaughter, Billy Martin. I mean, I may be even forgetting 1 or 2.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But it was
I
jackpot.
believe they were playing cards or something there.
We believe that we saw them in the car, all bunched in a car, going up Fifth Avenue as we were walking home. And I for some reason, we thought maybe we heard something too. I don't know. But we thought that they were playing cards over there. So
Do you have any idea where in the south end of town? Was it one of the ranches? Any idea what street it was?
do you?
I do. I'm thinking it was one of the ranches for sure. South of St. Peter's.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure if it was south of Howland.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it was, Beach Court or Beach Drive North or South, somewhere in there.
Let me stay on Mickey Mantle for a couple of minutes. This is legend, and I don't know if it's accurate. Maybe you can straighten it out for me. You were talking about Manning, I guess, and you have a story about Manning. I guess one of your brothers. I don't know if you're able to act as proxy for him, but to relay the story about your brother there.
Oh, sure.
All right, yeah, let me do that first.
Well, we had a paper route started by Jerry. He was the first one to be employed by the Record. And then our paper route was essentially the top of Manning, which the west end of Manning, which is Vance Owen Park, all the way down to Kinnicamack. That was basically the route. And Jerry started it and did his 2 or 3 years, I guess, as a paper boy, delivering the record every day. Back then it was Monday through Saturday, no delivery on Sunday, and it was 33 cents per week. That was the cost of it. And when you got 50 cents, when you went, you also had to collect. And when you got 50 cents from a guy, from a customer, you were pleased. And Johnny Blanchard always, you know Johnny Blanchard, 61 Yanks, and other years
He was
too.
in town.
He was in town,
Oh,
yes.
we're gonna have to-
Oh yeah, we'll get to
All
it.
right.
On Manning Avenue, and he was always a very, very nice, handsome guy. And I don't know if it was 50 cents. He might have even given $1. He was good. But once again, they were Yankees. You know, we didn't idolize
We
them.
weren't impressed.
Well, I mean, you know, you know,
Begrudgingly, once he gave you the 50 cents.
well, yeah. And then we'd go spend it at Governale's buying a soda, an ice cream, a Twinkie, whatever. But we had, we had respect for them, of course, but we didn't idolize them because they were Yankees, that's all.
So, before I forget, Steve it was, right?
Steve was middle.
So this is Steve's story then, with right?
Well, as far as
The Mantles.
as far as getting a picture with the Mantles.
Right.
So it was Jerry's paper route first,
Okay.
and then
But you probably know more about this. story.
and then it was Steve's paper route, and then I took it over. But we all experienced Yankees on our paper route. I'm not sure Cleet Boyer. Do you know if Cleet Boyer? I know he was in town. I remember him on Monroe Avenue.
Cleat Boyer on Monroe?
Yeah.
So I have a Cleat Boyer story.
Oh, really? Okay.
He moved down to Coles Court, the corner.
Oh, okay. So I think he was in a different part of town for a year or two also. Because, the rumors used to spread quickly, of course, and they were always correct. But he, let me see, we had Louis, on our block, we had Johnny Blanchard, Jim Coates, Louis Arroyo, and I think that was it. And they were all on the corners of Bogart and Manning. Blanchard was on the northeast corner. Louis Arroyo and Jim Coates, different years, were on the southwest corner. And I'm not certain who lived across from Johnny Blanchard.
So this was the late 50s, early 60s by the
Yes.
time you were doing it.
Yes.
All right. So let me, before I forget again, so on the picture, because there's been a lot of buzz about a Look magazine.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe we don't have it.
All right, so what do you know about it? Because we're going to try to fill in the blanks with it.
No, you
Do
know.
Well, I mean,
do you know when and the details of how that came to be?
well, Steve was probably, of all the brothers, of which there were 6 of us, and 2 sisters, Steve was interested in baseball, like everybody was at the time. I mean, everybody in America, baseball was the passion. But he was certainly, notwithstanding our disregard for Dodgers and Yankees, he wasn't a fanatic about baseball like Jerry and I were. But he knew what was going on. He played Little League. He did all that stuff. But he just happened to go down there one afternoon. He probably had nothing better to do. And, maybe seeking an autograph. Most likely he was by himself. And it just so happened, he was playing with, I presume, Mickey. There was also a David Mantle. I think there were 3 boys. But he just went down to presumably get an autograph and see what was happening. And it just so happens that at the time, a photographer came from Look magazine. And, did a story of, Mickey in the suburbs or whatever. And took a rather substantial picture, not on the cover, but probably half a page. And look, if you remember, Look and Life magazines were tall publications, and it probably was half the page of Steve Donahue, collecting an order. I think that's what they say, collecting an autograph. But I just can't believe that we don't have that somewhere.
Yeah, right.
But
Do you have an idea what year it might have been around, or what part of 50s? Are we talking about?
60, 61, 62.
no more than that. I would think I would lean towards 1960, but it's right in that area.
We came across a Life magazine article about Mickey Mantle. It shows him playing catch. I'm not sure if he has a shirt on, but he's playing catch in the front yard, or supposedly playing catch, but it's in front of a ranch house. So growing up, I only knew Mickey Mantle, River Edge, Summit Avenue, Manning or Manchester. We got it confused. Okay. Then the third spot was Olympia Drive, and I don't know. I never saw it for a fact, but I don't know if you're familiar with when Mickey Mantle lived in a ranch house at all.
I am not familiar with that. He definitely lived on Manning, and it definitely was not a ranch house. But these, Olympia Drive, and you said Summit, I think. I mean, every summer it was like, the gossip trail. What Yankees are in town and where do they live?
Yeah.
I mean, they were all over the place.
Right. You guys have added a lot here in terms of the names. Let me make sure. Tom Sturtevant, who not only a Yankee, but you guys, he was a Met at the end of his career.
Yes, he was.
Right?
And I think he came from Kansas City.
Right.
And back then, Kansas City and the Yankees used to deal.
Not just dealing, they were like a farm club. But,
exactly.
I was just reading about that. Oh
exactly
my God,
right.
Yeah. So there was Tom Sturtevant. I got an order. Well, knocked on the door of Tony Kubek, and he lived on Valley Road. And I don't know if you remember Ralph Cramden, doing the humma humma.
Oh, yeah.
I get to the door, knock on the door, and it's time for me to say something, and my mouth moves, but no words come out.
Right.
But he was on Valley Road, and then Cleet Boyer, as I mentioned, Coles Court. But you added some Louis Arroyo, Jim Coates.
Tom Tresh.
Tom Tresh.
Yep.
You remember where?
I'm thinking, once again, I'm thinking over towards Monroe Avenue, Madison Avenue, in between like Elm and Bogart. I remember for some reason, he was good friends with the Pollocks. For some reason. Also, Tracy Stallard. And we mentioned, I think, Bobby Richardson.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Bobby Richardson, too.
Yeah.
And do you remember?
Well, I don't remember that he necessarily lived here, but I think I remember him from your story.
I think so too, and I think Whitey Ford too.
Yeah.
Well, really? And Muscaron, anybody? You don't remember where he might have been at all? No.
I don't.
No.
He was over there that night, but yeah, I don't.
So the definite with precision, though, is that corner of Bogart and Manning, where the Yankees lived there.
Yeah.
And then you've got Mickey Mantle placed on Manning as well. And then you've got a couple of them up by Madison and Monroe.
Yes.
All right. If it comes back to you specifically.
And they used to rent the house that Johnny Blanchard lived in, or rented, which at least one or two other Yankees lived there, was owned by a woman whose name was Mrs. Cullen, who I think was a teacher at St. Peter's. And that was like, they lived over by Continental and Fifth. I'm not exactly sure which house, but right over there. And I think that house became their possession because I think maybe her mother lived there, and so it became a rental home. And so that's why, like, year after year, that house became available because they used to just rent it to Yankees. And I'm sure they had no problem renting it at the time because the proximity to New York, I mean, it was perfect.
And in consecutive years, I recall I cut the lawn for that house. One year Johnny Blanchard was living there.
yeah.
Another year Jim Coates was living there.
Yeah, Jim.
I never saw either one of them, but I cut the lawn for that house in consecutive years, and the two different guys.
You mentioned that day when you got somebody got the 4 autographs there. What it makes me think, and you mentioned Billy Martin earlier and Whitey Ford just now, and has me thinking of the Copacabana incident.
Oh, sure.
Wondering, you were young, but I don't know if there's any buzz. Everyone was well behaved, or were there ever any stories of barbecues that became lively? And
Not that I know of, but I can't imagine there weren't any. Not with that crew.
You know it didn't get into the newspapers, but
Yeah.
you're wondering in the buzz of the neighborhood.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Hank Bauer probably would have been right in the thick of it.
Hank Bauer also.
Yeah, right.
That's cool. Any knowledge of? I have 2 other names that I want to throw by you. One of them was a Yankee, and it might have been a little later in time. Was any recollection of Joe Pepitone in town?
Not me.
No. No.
He lived on Cherry Muse.
Really?
I think is that the street that ends up on Kinderkermack?
Behind Cherry Hill.
The one,
towards
the
Kinderkermack.
one that goes down to Kinderkermack behind
Yeah.
Cherry Hill. Right.
Yeah.
That's where he was. He wrote about that.
No kidding.
Yeah, he says that's where. Yeah, and he also wrote about Moose Scourin in his book, and he was drinking and partying and the like, and under the wing. But he mentioned that, and it turns out that we did a little thing, a blurb locally about Yankees who lived in town, and one of the readers told us that a Met lived in town, and I don't know if you have any memories of that, but
No, I don't.
Jim Hickman.
Oh, I remember Jim Hickman well.
No, you would have gone for the autograph.
As a matter of fact, the game that I went to as part of the Little League contingent,
Yeah.
it was against the Cubs, and it went into extra innings at the Polo Grounds, and Jim Hickman won the game with a grand slam.
Really?
So I remember Jim Hickman well.
Yeah.
He was he was a guy who would have started on many major league teams. He was like one of the original Mets who had legitimacy, as a quality player. Right. And I think he might have made an all-star team or two. He wasn't he was no Willie Mays or Veda Pinson or Roberto Clemente, but he was a quality player.
Right. Let me, I guess, if you have any other recollections, I want you to add them. But as I wind down, as a Met fan, and this is a few years later, but what your thoughts were when the old Yankee Stadium was torn apart, and for a couple of years the Yanks couldn't play at the Yankee Stadium, and what was it like for them to be playing in your home at Shea Stadium?
In all honesty, I was a little bit ambivalent, more than a little ambivalent. They weren't very good. The Mets weren't very good. It's sort of like this year. Baseball's over in New York. It's time for football. It's sort of a shame because as much as I'm not a Yankee fan, the postseason is better when they're in it. And I'm a huge baseball fan, and I follow the Yankees as closely as I follow the Mets. But, it's over for both of them. It's been a disastrous year, and hopefully things get better.
The last thing on my part, because you mentioned it off camera before we started, but maybe you can help communicate to those who might be watching the video that baseball wasn't just a sport at the time. Given the role of society, the NFL didn't with Johnny Unitas and the Giant game. That was in the late 50s, and the NFL grew in the 60s. But before that, it was boxing and baseball. So maybe you can relay, both of you, your recollections that it wasn't just a sport like soccer is a sport and hockey, but it was baseball, not only in town, but around New York and I guess in the country. Mel Allen and the World Series and the whole thing. So maybe you can help communicate better than I could just what it meant that you said you weren't Yankee fans, but the fact that major league players and Yankees at that were in town, it meant something, huh?
Sure. Well, then like now, just because I'm not a Yankee fan, I knew what was going on with the Yankees. I knew who the stars were. I knew it was cool that they lived in town. But baseball, the way it captured the passion of America was well, I mean, I guess football maybe today is, but no, I don't think baseball was, grandparents, parents, kids, everybody was a baseball fan. It was really part of America. Maybe it was the post World War II, feeling of, let's join together and be passionate about some leisure activity. But I remember, you know, the only the first time I felt that another sport was starting to take away from the allure of baseball was basketball with the Boston Celtics. So like when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it was and then basketball started, not only for me, but for everybody. All the courts in town were full of basketball players. People loved the Celtics, loved the Knicks, and slowly but surely, basketball certainly got a very strong foothold. As far as I'm concerned, more so than football. But football still was also coming to take some of that space away from baseball. Not that I think baseball declined to any point that it was going to become, unimportant, but those sports started to, get in the way a little bit.
Right.
And to a lesser degree, boxing.
Sure,
Just one thing that comes to mind in terms of underscoring the importance of baseball in the community at the time was that playoff games, in particular World Series, school was in session, and there were no night games, right, at that time?
I don't think so.
No night games. So, yeah, if you were lucky enough to have a teacher that allowed somebody to bring in a TV, and of course we had the antenna that hardly worked very well, but you might get some reception, and but you could actually watch the World Series in school. So that kind of underscores how important baseball was at the time.
And the Yankees seem to be in the World Series almost every year. And that didn't diminish our enthusiasm for the World Series. The World Series was the World Series, it was the Super Bowl. And whether the Yankees were playing the Cardinals, which they often did in '62, in 7 games, the Yankees, beat the Giants in a heartbreaker when Willie McCovey hit a line drive to Bobby Richardson to end the series with Willie Mays on second base. But the Yankees were always there, and whether you're a Yankee fan or not, it was baseball. It was World Series baseball. And I presume it's the way a lot of people look at the Super Bowl nowadays when they don't have an interest in the particular team, but they just want to watch a Super Bowl. That's the way the World Series was, and I think still is to some degree.
It was a national event at the time,
Sure.
And the victories and the heartbreaks still exist. I was a big Yankee fan in 1960. The Bill Mazeroski. I was a little kid, but it still hurts. So
Yeah, I happened to be homesick for that series, but I was able to watch the whole series, and it was a heartbreaker for the Yankees, but not for me when Mazeroski hit that home run.
Yeah. Even though it doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, but
it was revenge for the what the Yanks inflicted on the Dodgers and the Giants over all the years.
yeah, we were Pirate fans.
And to reiterate, it was a different era. It was daytime baseball. It was television, and clearly it was an era before cell phones. And my apologies for the interruption earlier. We're noting that for the record here too. So. But before we go, and I say thank you. Anything else to add here in terms of either River Edge or the Yankees or anything else that's coming to mind?
Well, all I can say, it was a magical time. It was a magical time in River Edge. The town was blossoming. Kids were playing ball everywhere, all over. There were so many families with, 4 or more kids, And I think it was exciting for parents. It was exciting for kids. I think it was exciting for the churches and schools in town. The town was just blossoming, and becoming, what a great town it is today, and always has been.
No, I can't answer that. I totally agree.
As someone, my family came in 1951, and I liken this as the Yanks were part of that chapter, but it was that post-World War II chapter in which St. Peter's started, the synagogue was started, and so many of the institutions that are taken for granted here. And it was that generation that did it, but there was a sense of optimism, and I think that we get the residue of that now, even as the world has changed, and we all have changed, but I think at the core, and that's why I think it was important. I'm so thrilled in terms of the exhibit for baseball in River Edge, but have the chance to connect with you. So we honor not just Mickey Mantle and the story, but that whole generation too.
Sure. And the greatest generation, as they've been termed, our fathers. I mean, they truly were. I mean, what an accomplishment. The way they conducted themselves and were victorious in World War II, and they, their lives were uprooted when they're in the middle of college or beginning of college or not even in college, but their lives were interrupted, for several years with a Herculean task to win World War II, and they did it, and they came back with a lot of pride, and they deserve to have a lot of pride, and I think that just carried through to really make America great, as it certainly was then, is now, but it seems, we're a little more challenged now. Yeah, proximity is why I think they moved to River Edge, and I think Westchester County may have been too expensive.
Right. Sure. I mean, there are other towns a lot closer to New York City. So.
And I bet, for example, Teaneck, Elston Howard, first black player to play for the Yankees, and I'm sure he felt more comfortable in Teaneck. Understandably so. But I mean, I can't imagine there weren't other ball players in Teaneck and maybe Leonia, but River Edge, River Edge offered a lot. I think it offered, more of a bucolic setting, less of a, really not a city setting, but a nice, comfortable place to raise kids, and many of them had young kids. And I think it was probably affordable because, as we know, they worked during the winter in various jobs because they weren't millionaires back then. And that's why I think, Westchester County, a lot of people live in Westchester County now, understandably, and also Connecticut. But, money's no object to these guys now. Back then it was. And I think River Edge was perfect. And I think it was absolutely perfect at the time for these ball players.
I think affordability was a big thing. My folks, when they moved out, my mom wanted to look in Teaneck, but they couldn't afford it, and they couldn't afford Westchester. And as you were mentioning, the Yanks, the salaries they were making, it was $10,000. Mickey Mantle, I mean, but other than him,
Oh, yeah.
So it was affordable, and the ranches especially were more modest in tone. My last question for you: Willie Randolph, apparently, this is in the '70s, was up in Franklin Lakes, and by that time Reggie Jackson and players started making more. I'm wondering if you have any idea when the end of the River Edge era was for Yanks. There seems to be a gap, and the salaries didn't start increasing until the late '60s. But here was Joe Pepitone in '64. But you were mentioning Coates and Louis Arroyo and Mickey Mantle and Cuba. That was late '50s, early '60s. So,
Jared?
No.
I'm thinking probably by mid '60s it was pretty much over. I don't really recall beyond that it became a haven for Yankee ball players. Yeah.
Oh, great. As I said, anything else comes to mind, we'll
Sure.
hold out the camera again, and but thanks again for tonight. Huh?
Okay, and thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.